Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle.
Hi, this is Randy Kindig. Welcome to Floppy Days podcast number 3 on the TI59 calculator. My memories of the TI59 come from my days at college at Purdue in the engineering program. I had used a slide rule in high school, believe it or not. I don't know how many of you out there remember using a slide rule, but when I was in high school physics, calculators had just really come out. They were very expensive. I didn't own one, and they wanted everyone to know how to use a slide rule anyway, so that's what we used in my physics class. Now, when I went into the engineering program at Purdue, calculators, this was in 1975, calculators were finally becoming at least somewhat affordable, and especially the programmable calculators. I bought a TI59 in my early years at Purdue. I don't even remember whether it was my freshman or sophomore year there, but it was pretty early. So it had to be in the 76, 77 time frame. I used that calculator as my primary computer, basically, until I got TRS-80 Model 1, my first desktop computer, in 1979. I loved programming that calculator. It was the 58C, and during this podcast I will be talking about the 58C, the 59, and the 58. They were all basically the same machine with more or less memory or more or less capabilities, but pretty much the same machines. But I loved programming that. It was my first real programmable device, and there were a lot of powerful things you could do with it. I remember using it for my engineering classes, and it was handheld, and I could take it with me to class, and it was really a nice device. I've got very, very good memories, and in fact still have my original TI-58C calculator. I was pretty amazed at the amount of feedback I got when I said that I was going to talk about the TI-59 calculator in my next podcast. I got quite a few emails. I got quite a few contacts from various people, and the next item I'm going to put on here is actually a voicemail that I got from Jeff Salzman, who has recently been on the Retro Computing podcast. He runs a blog called vintagevolts.com, and he was very interested in providing some feedback, and I really appreciate it. So the next segment is going to be Jeff Salzman talking about his memories of the TI-59 calculator.
I've always been a long-time fan of the early TI programmable calculators. My very first one was a TI-57. I like the fact that I can put in some common formulas for math class and stuff, and then be able to reuse it over and over again. But yeah, that one had like 50 steps of programming that you could do, which was okay. It was good on the cheap, but I outgrew it rather quickly when I got into electronics class in high school. Then after saving up, at the time was a considerable amount of money, I bought myself a TI-58C, and that was kind of a big time for me. I had a lot of programming steps. I was able to assign a lot of my electronics formulas to individual function buttons at the top, the A through E buttons that are made available in the calculator. And best of all, it wouldn't forget my formulas when I turned off the power, or even if the battery went dead. The constant memory feature, that was great. And I used a lot of electronics class. We had a lot of formulas which required the use of simultaneous equations, and the TI-58 and the TI-59 have programmable, or they have library modules that go into them, and the one that's built in with it, I think it's called the master library, had a program built in that did simultaneous equations, so that made it real easy to use to calculate values in circuits, which were easily calculated by the use of simultaneous equations. So I use that feature an awful lot. Plus formulas for calculating currents and power and Ohm's law type formulas and transistor biasing. Everything had a formula, and the use of the TI-58 made it real easy to do that. I just program a list of the formulas, assign them to buttons, use a little function card reference that slides into the top of the calculator to write the name of the function that I programmed in there, and away we go. It made it real easy for test time. And although when I went to school, they kind of frowned upon calculators in all other classes, like math class, like today, I think it's mandatory to have a calculator today, but back then, we had to use pen and paper and, look up trig tables in the back of a book to do a lot of complex trigonometry formulas, and even the algebra stuff. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to take advantage of the TI-58 in any other class but electronics, but it really came in handy for me in my electronics class, and I was glad to have an opportunity to have a calculator that was generally affordable for a high school student, but still be as powerful to be able to allow me to manage all the complex calculations that electronics class had required me to work with. But even then, it was still a fun calculator. Outside of school, there's games you could play on it, some building games. I wrote a rudimentary blackjack type game for it. I kind of like the number game that was built into it with the master library. It's just a great all-around fun calculator.
Again, that was Jeff Salzman of VintageVolts.com. I want to thank Jeff for leaving his thoughts about the TI-59. I do want to apologize to everyone for the quality of that, and to Jeff because I had to cut off part of his talk. The voicemail service that I had Jeff use, for whatever reason, part of the audio clip that he left was not the best quality. So what I wanted to do next was we'll go into the TI-59 and talk about some of the specifics. First of all, I hadn't realized that Bill Cosby was the spokesman of the TI-59. I knew that for the TI-99 that came along later, the computer, that he was the spokesman, and there are many video ads of him, video and print ads of him as a spokesman for the TI-99. But I found an ad from 1981 where he was also the spokesman for the TI-59 calculator. This ad basically is for a $20 rebate on the TI-59 programmable. It says, even without the $20 rebate, the TI-59 is special. It's our most powerful programmable, and we've never offered it at a lower price. And then it goes into some details of the particular calculator, which I will discuss later in the podcast. But I just thought that was pretty interesting. It says, any TI-59 owner can join our professional program exchange. So if you like the idea of having a real programmable power, take us up on the rebate offer. Buy a TI-59 and fill out the coupon below. The offer ends December 31st, 1981. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Next, I thought I'd go into the history of the machine. The TI-59 was introduced in May 1977. At the time, they had the TI-57 out for a while, which was also programmable, although less powerful, and it was also a successor to the TI-SR52, both of which were fairly common programmable calculators of the day. The TI-58 and 58C also were low-end variations of the TI59, lacking a magnetic card reader and with less memory. The main competitor at the time that the 59 came out was the HP 67, with the TI59 having more memory, more flexibility concerning how that memory was used. Now, when it came out, it was announced at a cost of $299. Now, at the time, again, this was 1977, a loaf of bread was 32 cents, a gallon of gas was about 64 cents, a car was about $5,800, a house was about $54,000, and the average income was $18,264 a year in the United States. So $300 was certainly not cheap, but was at least reasonably affordable. The TI59 was the first real programmable calculator in the world. You could actually use it to perform some useful work. It could handle 960 program steps, nearly 1 kilobyte of RAM, 100 data registers, and a variety of built-in functions. It was actually a personal computer you could afford in the late 1970s. It was a very powerful scientific calculator with many built-in functions. In addition, it could be programmed like a computer to run complicated programs on demand. Programming the machine is and was done by recording key presses in programming mode. A program consists of a number of steps entered on the keyboard, which will be repeated automatically at every program run. You could also activate programs in the Programmable Memory Module, or ROM. Programming was essentially a matter of writing machine language programs, very similar to machine language programming, which supported conditions, loops, and access to memory registers. Now, there was an ongoing battle between HP and TI at the time, and it actually still continues somewhat today. Both companies still produce calculators. So HP was trying to come up with something that would compete better with the TI59. So at one point they released the HP 41 series of calculators, which was also extremely powerful and which is still fairly popular today. If you listen to Retrobits by Earl Evans, he had a podcast on the HP 41 if you want to hear more about that. Now, the advent of the handheld basic pocket computers really spelled the doom for the programmable calculator. Things like the Tandy Radio Shack pocket computer line, PC1 through PC8, and other pocket calculators that could be programmed via BASIC rather than a machine language, were much simpler to use, and as a result, the 59 and its brethren couldn't really compete anymore, and it was discontinued in 1983. Now some technical specifications. The CPU on the TI59 was a TMC 0501 centered architecture, which is basically a 4-bit processor. In all, there were 13 integrated circuits in the TI59. It had a red LED screen with 10 digits, each made up of 7 of the LED segments. Weight was approximately 12 ounces with the battery pack, and about 8.5 ounces without. As far as the operating system, it was known as AOS, or the algebraic operating system. Basically, it was an algebraic entry of equations with precedence. It allows the user to enter most calculations in the way that they're normally written down, which made them much easier to enter. And this was opposed to the RPN, or reverse Polish notation, that the HP calculators used. And again, this is just another reference to the ongoing war between HP and TI that was going on at the time. Now, funny enough, the TI, even though it used AOS, did come out with an RPN module so that if you wanted to, you could use RPN on the device. The keyboard contains 45 keys, which allows access to more than 100 functions because you had a shift key labeled second and an inverse function key labeled INV. The TI59 has a maximum of 100 memory registers. And if you use the maximum memory registers, you have 160 program steps or 960 program steps maximum with 0 memories. Now the nice thing is you could partition your memory between registers and program steps, adjustable in increments of 80 program steps or 10 memories. So you could really configure this thing however you wanted. If you needed more program steps, you could go with less memories. If you didn't need a large program but needed a lot of memory storage, you could use more memory registers. Now the TI58 and the 58C were the less powerful brethren of the TI59, as I mentioned. The TI50C having continuous memory and the TI58 not having continuous memory, neither of which either had the magnetic card reader. But they had 60 memory registers maximum or a maximum of 480 program steps. One program step occupies 1 byte while a numeric value requires 8 bytes. There were many ROM program modules, insertable ROM chips. The master library module ROM was included with the calculator and had many utilities in it. Each module could hold 5,000 steps, and it's estimated that at least 50 or so specialized modules were made. Even some OEMs and other companies produced their own solid-state modules for specific applications for the TI59. One example of that is a special ROM module developed for the United States Marine Corps to calculate takeoff, landing, etc. Now, there was a magnetic card reader, as I mentioned, on the 59. It could store 480 bytes on the two sides of a single card, or 240 bytes per side. It was powered from an external adapter, an external AC adapter, or an internal NiCad rechargeable battery pack, which had 3 AA batteries in it. The battery packs were the only major drawback of the TI59, since you could only use the calculator for an hour or two of continuous use when the battery pack was fresh, while recharging took many more hours. As an aside, normally it's not a good idea to run the calculator strictly off the AC adapter without the battery pack. The battery pack acted as a filter to protect the machine. So just to let you know, if you've got one, that's not a good way to run it. Some peripherals that were available for this, for the 59 and the 58C. There were 3 different models of printers, thermal printers, all 3 of them, the PC-100A, B, and C. For all 3 of those, the calculator was mounted on the top and secured with a key. And so you put the calculator on the top. You take the battery pack out, basically, of the calculator. It's got a squarish adapter on the top of the printer, and you put the calculator on top of that in so that squarish area fits into the battery pack area, and then you use the key to secure it to the printer. This would act as power for the calculator while it's mounted. Now, the one that I have, the PC100C, and I'm not sure about the other two because I've never owned one of those, also contain a compartment for recharging the battery pack. So when you took the battery pack out of the TI59, you can put it into this other compartment. It'll recharge the battery pack while you can use the calculator as it's secured to the printer. Now, the printer could print out what was displayed on the calculator, or it could use it for debugging purposes. As I mentioned before, there were many additional program modules that were made available at various points in time for the calculator. Some examples are real estate, investment, statistics, surveying, and aviation. These all came from TI, while there were others that came from other third parties. Another interesting peripheral that was available, and I found some information on the internet about this, although I never heard or really, I've never seen or really heard of this particular device. Apparently there was a TV interface that was marketed, which contained a receptacle identical to the base of the connection of the printer that I mentioned, and it would allow you to connect the calculator to a television, a black and white television, with a coaxial cable. Now that's interesting. I assume it probably acted just as a printer would act, in that it probably looked like a printer interface to the calculator, so that you could either see what was on the screen again, or use it for debugging purposes. Many popular magazines, books, and software were available at the time, and some are available today. I'll go through some of these. Some of these are books that I have. Others are manuals. First of all, there is a TI manual archive at rskey.org. That's rskey.org. And again, I'll have links to all of these in the show notes. If you go to floppydays.libsyn.com, you'll be able to find all of these links. But all of the TI manuals are available there. Some of the books that I have and that were made in the day, first of all, I mentioned the synergy between the HP41 and the TI59. They were very comparable calculators. They were very much competitors at the time. So there were some books that reference programming on either device. And I've got one called Programming the TI59 and HP41 Calculators by Paul Garrison. Another book that I have is called The Source Book for Programmable Calculators, put out by Texas Instruments. And it was just a useful book for various ways to use your TI59 calculator. The book that came with the calculator was called Personal Programming, a complete owner's manual for the TI Programmable 5859. And it's a very good reference on how to use the calculator. Another book that I have is called Programmable Calculators by Harold S. Ingleson. And again, it covers multiple calculators, not just the TI59. It also covers some of the other TI calculators. As far as software goes, there was a professional program exchange put together by Texas Instruments called PPX 59, and it was an official TI59 software library, actually run by TI. It was a fascinating collection of software and a newsletter published 6 times a year, but not available to members outside of USA and Canada. It cost $18 a year to be a member, and there were hundreds of TI58, 58C, and 59 programs that were published before this bi-monthly newsletter was discontinued in 1982. Some of the programs were also bundled into something called program paquettes. And these paquettes included themes of programs, some of which were fun, astrology, programming aids, and electronic engineering. There was also a newsletter put out called the PPC Notes. It was the premier newsletter of the TI calculator enthusiasts, so it covered all of the TI calculators, but certainly covered the 59 and 58C. The PPC Notes was put out in the late 70s, and actually the final issue was through November of 1991. There were 10 issues per year, 16 pages per issue with occasionally double issues. Newsletters contain extensive survey articles about the TI59 programming, quirks, hints, programs, and many of the programs were mostly math and games. Now, what could you do with the machine? People found various uses. Obviously, because it was a powerful scientific calculator, it was used a lot for people for classwork in schools and colleges. But what about if you want to have fun with the machine? Well, one thing that people found that they could do using the TI and the printer was to print a year's calendar with the device. Now, that may not sound like a big deal, but there were some friendly competitions between the TI59 and HP41 owners that caused some really nifty calendar programs to be written. There was a contest started in May 1978 when Jaron Weinberger and Lou Cargill wrote a TI59 program able to print a calendar in 34 minutes. 34 minutes. Well, this was seen as a challenge to all the other programmers out there, and they decided they'd take their shot at it. I'm probably going to mangle this name, but someone named Panos Kalidas managed to cut that time from 34 minutes to 5.5 minutes. However, Roger Hill wrote an HP41 program published in the July-August 1980 issue of PPC Journal, and he produced a calendar in 2 minutes and 17 seconds. After many iterations, Palmer Hansen wrote a fast mode calendar printing program that seemed like it would be unbeatable. It produced a full calendar in 1 minute and 32 seconds, which is pretty remarkable. Yet, Roger Hill finally won the contest with a program that only took 1 minute and 14 seconds on an HP41. Now, something else is a chess program. Now, you might think, now it's not going to be possible to write a chess program on a calculator that has essentially 1 kilobyte of storage on it, and that you program using symbolic code. But people found ways to write a chess program on a 1 kilobyte computer like the ZX81, and that's definitely a challenge. But writing a chess program for the 1 kilobyte TI59 using symbolic code is really a true masterpiece. There was a program called Shock 2.1 written by Michael Sperber, published in TI PPC Notes Volume 7, Number 7. It followed all the rules of chess and could even defeat an inexperienced chess player if he or she lived long enough to see all the moves, because it typically took 3 to 6 hours per move. I still find it amazing, though, that you could write a chess program in that little amount of memory and have it actually work and be able to take on a human opponent, even if it did take that long. Now, the PC100C printer was a character-oriented device, so it wasn't possible to plot high-resolution graphics. But as I mentioned, there were calendar programs that were written, and the way that this was even discovered that this could be done was that Michael Sperber, Gerald Schluter, and Johann Berger discovered that hex 25 code would halt the printing operation so that only the top 3 pixels of the characters got printed. So rather than printing the entire character, it would just print the top 3 pixels. Well, by carefully choosing characters, programmers were then able to design fascinating output, or at least fascinating for the day. What are some modern upgrades? Well, there really aren't any modern upgrades per se, but there are ways that if you come across a TI59 or 58C that needs some sort of repair, that there's something not working quite right on it, you can still find modern solutions to those. For instance, on eBay, there is a card reader gummy wheel repair kit. Now, the card readers on the TI59 had rubber rollers, and over time the rubber could decay and the reader then essentially would quit working. So with this gummy wheel repair kit, it's supposedly possible to repair that problem. Now, I personally have never bought this kit, even though the card reader on my particular TI59 does not seem to work. I do intend one day to probably buy this kit and give it a shot and see if it works. Also, the battery packs. As you know, rechargeable battery packs are not going to last forever. Many times you'll come across a TI59 that still has the original battery pack in it. Now, both my TI58C and the TI59 that I bought on eBay had the original battery packs in them. What's remarkable is that they had not leaked. But in any event, you're probably going to find that you need a replacement battery pack. There are replacement battery packs that you can buy on eBay. Someone has taken, now you've got to use the original battery pack and take out the old batteries and put in new batteries and do some soldering if you want to make these yourself. But you can buy the pre-made ones on eBay, and I have purchased 2 of these and they both have worked great. So I can definitely recommend these. But if you just do a search for the BP-1 battery pack, you can find those on eBay. They cost approximately $50, so they're not cheap, but it's definitely worth it. The upside to this is that the overall runtime using these new battery packs, the technology that they use, has increased runtime to something like 5 to 10 hours compared with the 1 to 2 hours of the original NiCad batteries. Now, if you wish to do your own battery repair, you can go to the Data Math Calculator Museum, which I'll have a link to, and there are battery repair instructions there. So if you want to give that a shot, you know how to solder, take a look at that. There are also, came across a website which has instructions for fully disassembling and cleaning your TI59. And I also came across a site that lists maintenance tips and common failures and how to correct those. So I'll have links to all of those. But, depending on what you run across, if you buy a 59, you might find some of this information useful. As far as emulation goes, it turns out there are quite a few emulators out there, and I was surprised at how many there are. There are emulators for just about any operating system that you might want to run an emulator on. One of the nice ones that I use that's for the Windows platform is the TI59 emulator by Gemtree Software. And if you are looking for a TI59 emulator, I'll have the link for you. You can go download and run that, and it works very, very well. It not only emulates TI59, but it also emulates the printer. There's also a very nice TI58C emulator by Pierre Aubert. Some of the documents are in French, although you can get English versions. But this also is a very nice, very powerful emulator. There are versions for Windows and for Linux. It's the nice thing about this emulator, it's very configurable. Very configurable. It's skinnable. You can make your TI59 emulator look like the original 59, or you can make it look like an HP calculator, or just about anything you want it to look like. It also emulates the printer, and it has some program debugging features. So if you're interested, take a look at that. There's also a Java-based emulator for running in a browser called Vertigo that I did not try because on my Macintosh I actually don't have Java installed, but I read a lot of good things about this particular emulator. I don't think it's as full-featured as the others that I mentioned, but it seems like it's a pretty good emulator. There's also a TI59 emulator by Elaine Zanchetta for Windows that I'll have a link to. Now, having some iOS devices, the iPhone and iPad, there is an emulator called i59 that it turns out is no longer available on the App Store, but I still have on my iPhone. And there is an emulator called the RCL-59. RCL obviously standing for the recall button on the TI59, which is labeled RCL. And it looks like it's a pretty good emulator. Now, it's currently $2.99 on the App Store, but it also emulates the printer as well. So if you need an iOS emulator, that looks like it's a pretty good one. I understand I don't have any Android devices, but I understand there are TI59 emulators for Android as well. So there are lots of choices out there for emulation. As far as current groups, really the only thing I could find, there is a TI59 group, mailing list group, which is TI59 at lists.ti59.com. It's actually reasonably active. So if you have an interest in the TI59, you can subscribe pretty easily to that group and talk away with other TI59 users. As far as current websites go, I came across, several, not a huge number of TI59 websites still out there, but there are definitely some interesting ones, and the ones that are there have a lot of information and a lot of useful programs. One that I came across is believe it or not, somebody by the name of Guillaume Tello, and I apologize for mangling your name if I've done so. I'm certain I have. It's a TI59 compiler. So it basically lets you program in a high-level language similar to BASIC with variable names, procedure names, an if, end-if structure, for-loop structure, etc. It runs on DOS, so you could certainly run it in a DOS window. It also has a graphical shell for Windows, so you could run it in Windows. And it outputs a program like the printer does with steps, key codes, and mnemonics. So basically you run this compiler, it outputs the program, and then you can take that and either run that in an emulator or run it on the real hardware. And it actually interfaces with some TI59 emulators with direct loading of the resulting program in those emulators. So if you have an interest in writing some programs and you don't want to write programs in the built-in assembly-like language on the TI59, this would be one way to go, and I find it extremely interesting that someone went to the trouble to write something like this. Another very useful site, it has a lot of information on it, is TI59.com by Dejan Rastanovic. It's a super site for TI59 information. It has a lot of history, a lot of historical information about the machine. It has some programs that you can download, print out, and put into the machine. It has information about publications. There's really a ton of useful information on this site. And in fact, I got a lot of information for my podcast from this site. There's also a TI59 site by Bernd Ullman that has a lot of useful information. And again, I'll have links to all of these in the show notes. That's really about all I had. The last thing that I wanted to do here was to go through some letters from listeners. I mentioned earlier that I was really surprised that there were as many contacts. When I pre-announced that I was going to have this podcast about the TI59, I received a lot of emails and a voicemail about it, and I was just surprised at the interest. So I thought I'd take a couple of the letters that I got, the emails that I got, and just read those. The first one I have here is one from a gentleman by the name of Ken Saunders from California. He said, "My current TI59 activity is designing a smoothing filter to replace the battery pack, which is itself, of course, a very effective smoothing filter. The goal is to be able to just leave the machine on 24/7 and have it be able to safely handle transients caused by power outages without frying the processor or overloading the 9131 wall cube. I'm willing to not be able to use the card reader, at least for now. There are also numerous other suggestions. For example, just connecting an appropriate voltage large capacity battery or a regulated power supply across the battery pack terminals. Of course, that's a great idea and it would enable the card reader, but for now at least it's a little kludgy for me. Anyway, once completed, I'll make a post to this list." Now, the list that he's referring to is the TI59 list that I referred to earlier. And again, thank you to Ken Saunders for writing in. And good luck with that. If you are successful, please let me know, Ken. I also received an email from Palmer O. Hansen Jr. Now, I mentioned Palmer earlier because he was one of those involved in the calendar contest. So I was really surprised to receive this letter from Mr. Hansen. I also looked up his name, and it turns out that he was very heavily involved with the TI59. He actually succeeded Maurice Swinnon as the editor of the TI PPC notes that I mentioned and successfully published that newsletter from 1983 to 1987. He also wrote many famous TI59 programs, including a speedy factor finder, and published great survey articles about fast mode and hexadecimal codes. Now, as I understand it, Palmer is now retired, but I just think it's great that he took the time to write in. So I'm now going to read his letter concerning some memories about the history of the TI59. He says, "I think that the development of fast mode is an important part of TI59 history. The search for the methodology was a result of the observation that a program operated from a memory module ran about twice as fast as the same program operated from user memory. The first step in the development of fast mode was Martin Neef's discovery of how to run a fast mode program in early 1980. The details are in TI PPC Notes, Volume 5, Number 6. The deficiency of his method was that the user had to enter the program after establishing fast mode. In mid-1980, I found a methodology which would allow a fast mode program to be initiated with magnetic cards. Using the technique, in July 1980, I submitted a response to the print code challenge that had appeared in TI's PPX Exchange newsletter, Volume 4, May-June 1980. My version was not published. Later in 1980, I submitted a fast mode program for printing a calendar to TI PPC notes. The program and description were published in Volume 7, Number 7 of PPC notes. The existence of fast mode was acknowledged by TI with the caution that TI does not promote its use. It's likely that TI's caution was related to the HP 97 fiasco, which cost HP a substantial amount of money. I was eventually asked to submit a description of fast mode for publication in PPS Exchange. My submission was published in Volume 5, Number 4, in July-August 1981. TI always seems somewhat uncomfortable with the use of undocumented features. So again, I want to thank Palmer O. Hansen Jr. for that letter. Well, that's really all I have today. That's pretty much all I could find on the TI59 calculator. Please leave feedback on iTunes via email at floppydays@gmail.com, or you can leave voicemail, and I'd strongly encourage you to do so, at 206-426-7200, and you may hear yourself on the next show. I really would love to hear from you, and thank you for any feedback I've already received. Also, you can visit the website at floppydays, that's floppydays.libsyn.com, for links to the items discussed in today's show. I will see you all next time, and between now and then, please pull out a vintage machine and compute like the old days. Thank you.